Well, hello and welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more tech, news, content and wisdom from the world of marketing. Joining me as always is a man on a mission to keep marketing simple, the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast and the host of the Roger Vlog video series. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's a great pleasure to be joined by a man who's also on a mission to demystify digital marketing, the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. I give you Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Roger, this is episode 29, a fine prime number, if you don't mind me saying so.
And the one before 30.
Yes. So, by the way, just quickly, we've got some lovely message of, well done and thank yous, primarily from David Kilkelly, who had a bit of a shout out about a week or so ago on YouTube. But you also got a lovely message from Andrew Davis on LinkedIn, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it makes it well worthwhile doing the creator shout outs when people take the trouble just to reply and say thank you. It's just part of the whole thing that makes Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast just a pleasure to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that still people are going through a tough time. There's the weather, there's the global pandemic, there's just the ups and downs of life and business. So we're going to do our very best to give you a bit of light entertainment, things to think about and things to chuckle about as well. So, without further ado, in 2, 3, 1, let's move on to In the News.
Shopify is joining forces with Facebook to make it easier for merchants operating their own Shopify-powered businesses to sell across Facebook and Instagram.
Well, according to a recent analysis by IPG Media Brands, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube lagged behind TikTok and Reddit at moderating harmful content during the second half of 2020.
News Showcase is the name of the latest Google app now available in the UK, giving you access to curated content from over 120 publications, including Reuters and the Financial Times, the News Statement and The Telegraph.
Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, shared at the virtual Goldman Sachs Technology and Internet Conference that the company is exploring ways for its users to receive tips or online payments from their followers.
The New York Times has reported that Facebook is working on a competitor to audio social network Clubhouse. Interestingly, Twitter already has one called Twitter Spaces, which is now available to just 3,000 people.
Well, workers in 5 European countries, including the UK, now expect to work from home until June of this year, with more than half hoping to work remotely for about 2 days a week in the future.
Data from LinkedIn shows demand for marketers with an understanding of paid social media has grown by 116% since last year, with Instagram the top platform.
And finally, the internet is still talking about how lawyer Rod Ponton was briefly turned into a kitten thanks to a Zoom face filter during a live court hearing in Texas. The sentence, "I'm not a cat," is still trending.
I love that last one, being a cat lover, as you would expect.
Do you know, in a way, let's begin with that last one. It's kind of been, the sign of the times, the entire year of essentially mistakes and mishaps over the internet.
Yeah, and there's the famous newsreader, isn't there, on Zoom, having a Zoom call, having an interview on primetime TV, and the door bursts open and his kids come running in. But it's quite nice as well, isn't it, don't you think?
I think so. I think it's allowed people to, or forced people to be just more human and to have a sense of humor. Although I think it's tricky in the legal context to try and obviously deliver maybe a sentence or to try and obviously defend maybe somebody. And it didn't last very long, but it was probably still 60 seconds very long for the poor man.
Yeah, absolutely right. So, Pascal, this whole Clubhouse cloning that's already going on, interestingly, you say that Twitter has got their own, and it's called Twitter Spaces. Now, funnily enough, I was going through the app the other day on my iPhone, and I noticed at the top that one of the little circles that is usually a Twitter story had a big purple ring round it. So I clicked on it, and it was a lady called Madeline Scalar. She's a bit of a Twitter expert. And lo and behold, it was one of these Clubhouse clone rooms, the Twitter Spaces. So I went into it, and there was about 30 people in there, and they were having a chat, and it effectively just looked exactly like Clubhouse.
Right.
So I don't know whether Spaces came before Clubhouse or vice versa, but it looks very much the same. But interestingly enough, they were talking about, will Twitter Spaces, when it eventually goes out beyond more than 3,000 people, become more popular than the phenomenally popular Clubhouse so far? And Madeline was saying, do you know, one of the big problems that Twitter has now and that Facebook has now is that they are tarnished to a certain degree. They've had data issues, there's been trouble with trolling on there. It can become quite, there's a lot of bullying, unfortunately, happens on both Twitter and Facebook. And she's saying that at the moment, Clubhouse has yet to be tainted by anything like that. That's not to say it won't be, unfortunately, but at the moment it isn't. And therefore, that could be its advantage in being able to resist Facebook and Twitter from effectively coming along and trying to steal share from them.
I think for me, the other thing that kind of comes to mind is that trait that we have as human beings to really, really go for novelty. Mm-hmm. And I wonder whether this Facebook attempt to essentially do a Clubhouse clone or Twitter Spaces that actually had such a limited release that it was of no significance to anyone. I wonder whether people just like the novelty factor of going to a different destination altogether to do something very, very different, because there is no history, there is no kind of habit in terms of audio networking with Facebook, Twitter, or all the others. And I wonder whether it's what people like to say, do you know what, I have what I do on Twitter, I do my own things on Facebook, but I do something very different on Clubhouse, and I like the multiplicity, the diversity of different apps on my phone, as opposed to just having a handful that will do everything.
Yeah, and again, I keep coming back to the fact that, do Twitter and Facebook really need to copy Clubhouse? Can they not just stick to their knitting and be known for something? Like, again, Twitter has always been, to me, one of the best social media platforms because it's that sharp, short ability to express yourself. And why add stories? Why add a Clubhouse clone? Just stick to what you're good at. Be very good at it. But hey, it just seems to me that a lot of the time today, everybody just wants to be exactly the same as everybody else.
Yeah, it makes you wonder whether, don't they have people to come up with new ideas, themselves? I mean, I just realized as I was reflecting on the new news headlines that it's been very, very kind of social media centric, and it's almost a signs of what's happening right now, in terms of what's already in the news and what people are thinking about. I mean, when you think about, for example, the LinkedIn report about this idea of paid social media as a discipline has grown by 116%. I think it's interesting because for a long time, many of my customers had little to no interest in advertising, whatever it was. And now we're seeing that people are changing their minds because I realized that you have to find different ways to reach your audience.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'm one of these people that always says, go where your customers are. And you'll know that certain people will be on Snapchat, certain people will be on Instagram. And the reason that they're on different platforms is that those platforms will appeal to them for a specific reason. It will actually get harder, I think, to target people on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, if all of these platforms start to be exactly the same. Because what will it be that makes one person choose to be on Twitter as opposed to Clubhouse if effectively they're all doing the same thing? So, yeah, similarity breeds mediocrity to a certain extent.
I think that's a very, very good statement. And let me just close this in the news review with remote working. So across so many industries, working from home was obviously frowned upon, and then literally people had to for the better part of most of 2020, if not already 2021. This idea of working 2 days a week in the future from home, for a number of many reasons. One of it could be actually quality of being able to concentrate on work as opposed to being in the office where there's all the hustle and bustle and so on, but also the impact on the environment, the impact on family time, and so on and so forth. I feel that this is something that most industries and sectors should look into seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it quite a lot in the big corporates that I work with, that they've realised how much money they've saved this year by not having to heat the offices and by not having to keep the offices open and not having to have people travel so much. I was talking to one company the other day whose travel budget for 2020 was 25% of the previous years. And they've actually said to their staff, do you know what? Even when things come back to normal, we're going to keep our travel budget at 25% because we've proved to ourselves this year that we don't need to travel. Now, I understand that, and I think that the environmental implications of less travel are fantastic, but that could also have a knock-on effect to live events. And with the best will in the world, I still like going to live events so I can hang out with my friends, have a few beers or a few glasses of wine with my friends and network. And I hope we never lose that. So yeah, use that 25% of the travel budget to maintain that sort of status quo, I think.
Now, very quickly, you are, as you mentioned a moment ago, a keen Twitter user. Do you see a point where at some stage you might want to invite people to give you a tip or form of payment on Twitter?
It has never, ever crossed my mind. Pascal. Having said that, I am doing a bit of an experiment at the moment. I've never ever charged people to listen to my podcast, and in fact, it's just not the done thing. I can't think of anybody who charges for people to listen to their podcast, unless it's like a BBC thing that you get with your license fee or something like that. And I've never really gone for sponsorship of my podcast, even though I've been offered it a few times, because I just genuinely don't want to subject my viewers to those really annoying adverts where, I'm just going to have a break now to talk about VPN, blah, 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 and this is why you should use it, and this is how much it costs and all of that sort of thing. People just get annoyed by that sort of thing. But that means that I don't make any money directly from the podcast. Yes, I get business from it because people listen to what I talk about. But I have been trying out this new website recently called Buy Me a Coffee. It's a bit like Patreon, I think, but it's just a little bit less obvious. And as you would expect, it allows people to buy you a coffee simply by deciding to give you £1 or £2 or £5 or something like that. And I'm just trying it out now just to see how many coffees I get bought. And at the moment, it's not been that many, I have to say.
Do you know, I like the idea of someone essentially showing and expressing their gratitude and thanks with a tip and make that just as an option that is almost globally available. Where I'm struggling is whether or not you will charge people to access to your marketing content. I'm having real difficulty with the logic there. Let's wait and see. Jack Dorsey discussed it at the conference recently, and we can only wait in terms of what they're going to do in terms of announcing it and rolling it out across the different accounts and so on. What I will say very quickly, back to Twitter Spaces and generally what those platforms do, they take just too long to release anything, and they only do it to a small, kind of privileged group of individuals. And that always kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I'm not going to talk about LinkedIn video, a live video anymore, but it just feels like, why? What is the logic behind a limited release to just a handful of people that some of us don't even know?
Yeah, and let's be honest here. It's always the same group
yes.
of American marketing gurus, isn't it, that seem to get access to these things well before the rest of the world. And now I'm maybe sounding a bit bitter here, and that's probably because I am. But I mean, I've not got any axe to grind with these people. They are extremely successful, but there are more people in the world who are doing and putting together great content. So come on, Twitter and Facebook and all of you social media platforms. If you've got something new to put out there, why not put it out to different people and see how we get on with it first, rather than just chucking it at the usual suspects?
Oh, well said, Roger. Now, thank you again for listening to our reflection and reaction to In the News. We're going to continue with some discussion within In Content Spotlights. So this is probably one of my favorite segments because really go into in-depth conversation and reaction to an article, to a webcast, to a podcast, indeed sometime even just an ebook. So Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Right, Pascal. This week we're going to talk about LinkedIn, so more social media, unfortunately. This article is usually the sort of article that I would probably pass by, but I just liked the way that the headline and the introductory paragraph were written, and it sort of sucked me into the rest of it. So it's called 7 Steps for Standing Out on LinkedIn, which you must admit is your pretty run-of-the-mill. I've seen a million articles with a heading very much like that, whether it's about LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it might be. It's always 7 steps to do something or to stand out on something, isn't it? It's written by a journalist called Rosie Purr, which is the second reference to cats that we've had in the podcast today. And it's in entrepreneur.com, the website. Now, again, the first sentence of the article is, LinkedIn is finally growing out of its Jurassic Park phase. Now, with an opening sentence like that, you just have to read a bit more, don't you? And I'm just going to read the next paragraph. From a deserted social media network inhabited by eager job seekers and lurking, do you have 15 minutes for a call type of salesperson, the platform is finally shaping up with new features like LinkedIn Stories, a sleeker interface which is less dinosaurish, and an exponentially growing number of content creators waking up amid a sea of shiny corporate ads disguised as posts. 2021 will be packed with action. And that really sets the scene for the rest of the article. Now, it says there are 7 tips. I'm not going to go into those 7 tips. What I want to go into is the 3 types of pillar content that Rosie suggests that you should put onto LinkedIn in order to be successful. And the reason I wanted to bring these up is that I still think that there's this sort of there's a LinkedIn police force, if you like, of self-appointed moderators on LinkedIn who have this LinkedIn as a professional platform type of vibe going on, and you'll get called out if you post a funny post or if you post a picture of a cat. It's a professional platform and therefore it's got to be about work or it's got to be about business. Now, I actually don't buy into that. I think that some of the best stuff that's going on LinkedIn at the moment actually mixes a little bit of business with a little bit of personal stuff and maybe a little bit of behind the scenes. And that's been my view for quite a while. And this article effectively sums that up and says, yes, this is the way to be successful on LinkedIn. So overall, it says, like any platform, if you want to stand out on LinkedIn, you're going to have to be a little bit controversial in what you post. So maybe me having a bit of a rant before about Twitter only giving the new stuff to the American marketing gurus is the sort of thing you might put on LinkedIn if you wanted to provoke a response. But the three pieces of pillar content that Rosie suggests you do is, first of all, number 1, insights. Again, not rocket science. No, she's saying crisp, updated professional tips on how you can target specific parts of your community. It doesn't have to be long essays, pages and pages of stuff. Just practical bite-sized tips that people can consume pretty much instantly. And I love that sort of thing. And then here we go. Second piece of pillar content is personal stories. Now, you've heard me tell the story about how I went into a management meeting in a remote country house and listened to a man spout management speak mumbo jumbo whilst wearing a pinstripe suit. That's a personal story which reveals why I have an aversion to complication in marketing, complication in language. And that's the sort of personal story that absolutely works a treat on LinkedIn. And then number 3, and possibly the most controversial, is the entertaining post. And this is where she's saying, it's actually all right to post a cat video or you down on the beach playing in the snow or something from time to time, as long as you're also doing it with the insights and the personal stories as well, and maybe even behind the scenes. And the other stuff is what you would expect. Do it with video, sometimes do it with text only, sometimes do it with pictures. Now, as a result of reading this article, I actually went into LinkedIn and looked at some of my favourite profiles. Content creators who have had shout-outs on this show, so people like the aforementioned David Kilkelly, and Jan Ambrose is another person. And if you look at what they're doing, whether they're doing it on purpose or by accident, these people are posting insights, they're posting personal stories, and they're being entertaining. So that's why I like this article. Not a massive revelation, but just actually bang on when you actually look at it and then go and compare it to what's actually happening on LinkedIn itself.
And you know what is interesting about this article you've chosen, the reminder, I do believe that this year could be a very good year for LinkedIn. They had a great 2020 because of obviously the element of recruitment and advertising and so on. But when it comes to the networking, because so many professionals were at home, as we mentioned a moment ago, they became more active on LinkedIn. And you know the old adage, Roger, you get get back what you put in. And I think people suddenly realize, hang on a minute, this LinkedIn thing that I've been neglecting for a while is not so bad after all. Because I will say that by and large, compared to other platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and many others, there was a lack of activity. What I mean by that is a lack of effort in creating valuable content, as you've summarized a moment ago. And I think last year just made people realize that it was important to look after your personal brand. It was important to keep things refreshed, but also it was important to have the system, as you mentioned a moment ago, of almost organizing your thinking around the content type. And we have seen more, what I would call, because I think the term entertaining is a tricky one. It can conjure up so many different things. For me, I would say you have to be witty. On LinkedIn, and you can afford to essentially talk about the trip on the beach and put something that has a slant, because actually in the world of business, particularly if you think some of the publication that you and I used to read, back in the days of printed media, there was always those pages of witty, entertaining content. Sometimes they were cartoons, almost like comic strips, and so. What I will say is that to get someone to smile, chuckle, and laugh was always part of business communication. But you're right. I think people have taken a view on LinkedIn that's been maybe to one extreme. And I wonder if last year has allowed those, sharp edges to come to be smoothed out a bit more.
Yeah, I think you've actually absolutely hit the nail on the head there. The enforced lockdown across the world has finally allowed LinkedIn to mature and maybe shaken off the image that it's had of being that professional, stuffy network. And maybe the people who were perpetuating that myth have either woken up and grown up, or have just left the platform and gone somewhere else. But I actually quite like LinkedIn at the moment. It's not a bad platform at all.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some great interaction, and in the context of a global pandemic, when I've been stuck at home, it's been a source of really joy for me to see the reaction, to have some running commentaries and people saying hi and so on. So it's great choice. Well, I must confess, once again, I'm rather perplexed as to the selection of news and content spotlight. Once again, we don't really talk to each other, but I've chosen something that is, again, targeting and questioning the contribution of social media platform as well as search engines. So the title is in two halves. It's an article that actually a friend of the show, Chris Ducker, helped me spot. It was written by Tobias, I beg your pardon, Elwood, the chairman of the Defence Select Committee for the Mail on Sunday. And the title, as I mentioned, is in two halves. First half, why the world would be a better place without Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Second half, and Britain could lead the way in cutting them down to size. Now, here's the context for you, Roger. For a few years now, like everybody else, I've been torn between the idea of digital, and particularly many platforms we mentioned so far, having a really positive impact in one's business success, But on one hand, I see, for example, how Facebook, can help you sell more within, the platform, and the other, how little they are doing to protect young people from abuse. On the other hand, I can see, what Twitter can do with regard to, helping you engage an audience, and the other, I can see how little they do in curbing down harmful content. There's this constant, dichotomy between the benefits, which I see are really quite obvious from a business point of view, but some of the negative impact in social life in general. And I've been torn, and I've had many discussions about it, wondering how do we progress this? How do we, those who perhaps spend a lot of time on this platform, those of us have had experience, how do we move this forward? Now, this article written it explores really this idea of, is it time to tame the Wild West of the World Wide Web? And what the article is questioning is, is it time, as we've done as societies many times before, is it time to dismantle the essentially upcoming monopoly of the likes of Facebook, Google, and Amazon, as we've done with the oil and gas companies, as we've done with the airlines, railway, telephone, broadband, where there is a multitude of choices, you could argue, in those kind of industries, but the choices are now becoming less and less. Case in point, we mentioned that Facebook wants to do a clone of Clubhouse. Your reaction and mine was, leave Clubhouse alone. It's fine. We want diversity and choices. So this kind of discussion that this article is bringing up, and is also kind of questioning how much longer will people, governments, and more allow those companies access to obviously our data, and obviously for profit, and how long can we allow them to be allegedly a participant in the wealth of a country, but actually treating the obligation to pay tax as optional. So I just thought it was an interesting article because it was reaching a point where I've been thinking about this a lot. And I think that, bear in mind what's happening in Australia. Do you remember we mentioned that in the news, Roger, that kind of minor kerfuffle between Google News, as the brand would be, and the Australian government? We know the many clashes in the US with Congress and those platforms, and we know that the EU is putting things in place to fine them for any form of bad behavior. So for me, my question to you is, what would a regulated world where Facebook, Google, and Amazon being more accountable look like, and what can we do moving forward to make those platforms just a better participant to the well-being and wealth of the different nations around the world?
Yeah, this is a long topic, isn't it? I don't really know where to start. I think that there are three things in my head which these massive mega global companies are currently getting wrong. First of all is their misuse of data. And on the one hand, we all worry about losing our identities and losing our data, and there's a lot of people who I don't like the government's test and trace system because it's like Big Brother watching, but yet most of the time we're more than happy to allow Facebook and Apple to spy on us through our phones. So there's a misuse of data there. The second one is their control of bullying or trolling or just nasty content. I just don't think they've done enough of that. They've let far too much political stuff and racist stuff and almost like warmongering stuff to a certain anti-vaxxing and all of that sort of thing. And then the third thing is the tax angle, which, as somebody who has just filled in my tax return, and the tax return, as you know, is a year back, so I had a relatively decent year, 2019 to 2020, and I suddenly find myself with a fairly sizable tax bill which I've got to pay now, when I've actually just had a pretty bad year in terms of business because of COVID. Now, what it means is that the next time I do a tax return, it'll be lower. But at the moment, I think, times are hard, and yet I've got this fairly sizable tax bill to pay. And then you read about Amazon and Jeff Bezos and all of that making billions and billions and billions, and yet they've structured their company so that they pay the minimal tax within the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Now, on the one hand, you could argue, well, governments have allowed tax rules to exist. They're not breaking the law. They've just done something within the law to minimise the amount of tax that they pay. But it still feels a bit wrong, doesn't it? Even though they're not genuinely evading tax, they're just avoiding it. And there is a subtle difference there. So yes, I think I would like to see some sort of regulation that comes in. And I've heard the Chancellor Rishi Sunak talking about sort of an online sales tax. When I see the word online sales tax, I can't help but sigh and just imagine that it'll be passed on to us, the customer, as opposed to genuinely coming out of the coffers of Amazon. So I'm sort of all for it, Pascal, but sometimes when governments get involved in regulations such as this, it sometimes backfires and it's the customer that ends up taking the hit as opposed to the companies that they're actually going after.
And I think if I look back at the second half of that title, Britain can lead the way in cutting them down to size. I think it's almost like an inkling of the solution here, which is that instead of having to deal with Google headquarters in the US, for example, they have to have a legal entity, let's say in France and Germany and then the UK. And from that moment on, they will abide by the rules of trading and the law for that particular nation. And I think they will start to maybe simplify a number of things. But also, if you think about what they've done with regard to broadband provision in the UK in particular, we don't have the sole provider that is BT. Whilst they may have done an enormous amount of investment in infrastructure, the number of options available to most businesses and households is quite significant. So again, can we be in a situation where Amazon could have maybe the depot, but other distributors can have a go, if that makes any sense? And why would, for example, Facebook only have the deal with Shopify? All other platforms should have the deal. So I think this is where we're going to get to, I think, a healthier position, because the more there's tension between, let's say, the business benefits and really the lack of benefits from the short point of view, the more there's going to be that tension and things are going to start to pull. That rope is going to break eventually, and we may see actually a time where the whole population will walk away from those platforms because something simpler and actually much more ethical comes along.
Well, I mean, all the way through the pandemic, I've tried to buy local. But you and I have had this conversation. I think a while back you bought a piece of kit that you've been looking forward to buying for a while, and you did the same thing. You tried to buy it local. And you got appalling service out of that company, mm-hmm. and therefore you ended up going and buying that piece of kit from Amazon. Now, yes, Amazon could be in danger of putting smaller businesses out of business, but if those smaller businesses aren't prepared to step up to the mark and give amazing service, then to a certain extent they are at fault as well. And Amazon shouldn't be penalised for offering really good service, but I think they should be held to account for tax avoidance to the levels that they are.
Well, as you said, Roger, this is a biggie. We're not going to solve it, just the two of us and in the context of this podcast. But I would love to hear from you, viewers and listeners, about what does a world where regulation is in place for those platforms to, let's put it frankly, behave better and more ethically. What does it look like to you? And do let us know. Get in touch and we'll make sure to read out those comments for you. But Roger, it's time to find a way to make the life of content producers a little easier. Let's move on to marketing, tech, and apps.
Let's do it.
Now, I know that this segment is one of Roger's favorites, looking at ways, as I mentioned a moment ago, to make your life easier as a content producer and a marketer. So, Roger, what have you got for us this week?
This week is a bit of a success on YouTube focus. For anybody putting together videos that are wanting to grow an audience on YouTube. Now, I currently use an app which I think we've featured on the show before. It's called TubeBuddy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that TubeBuddy does is it helps you to identify keywords which you can tag into your descriptions and tag into your tag boxes on YouTube to tell YouTube effectively what your video's about and hopefully get it seen by more people. And obviously the more people that see your video and the more people that like the videos, ultimately they may subscribe to your channel and you might start to grow. And now I've been using TubeBuddy probably for about a year now, and I've followed all of their advice, and they've got loads of videos on YouTube that you can watch as to how to research the keywords and try to have the right number of tags in your videos. And they even rank each keyword from bad to excellent. And what I've found on TubeBuddy is that I can find a keyword which ranks as excellent and all sorts of different variations that ranks as excellent. And then I upload the video and I can tell from the analytics that it isn't the keywords that are actually driving traffic to that video. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, I don't understand, TubeBuddy and putting so much store by this tag business, what's going on? And then there are other times when I've done the same and it absolutely is the keywords that are driving the traffic. So I think I've got a lot more to try to understand here. So what I've been doing recently is just trying out a few other ways of determining keywords. And I came across this one called Keyword Tool Dominator, which is fab, isn't it? It's almost like a Terminator of keywords. The Keyword Tool Dominator. Now, it's free to the extent that you're allowed to do, I think it's 2 or 3 searches a day for free. And then after that, it stops you and you would have to pay a fee in order to do it. But what I've found is that, looking for keywords on YouTube and using this tool and looking for keywords on YouTube using TubeBuddy and using other ones, which maybe I'll bring in later episodes of the show, not all of these tools agree on the same keywords. And that possibly might explain why some of my TubeBuddy keywords have been successful and others haven't. And that just makes you think there are all sorts of different apps which claim to understand the algorithm within a platform like YouTube. But I imagine that in reality what they're doing is that they're making some pretty well-informed guesses, but all the same, they don't know what the algorithm within YouTube is absolutely 100% doing, and therefore there is going to be an error factor. So I think that it's worth having a look at different ones. And I quite like this one. Not only has it got a really cool name, but I like the way the website's set out and the way it ranks everything and the insights that it gives you. So that was the first one. The second one is more of a convenience thing. And I know that content creators like convenience. Now, when I put together one of my YouTube videos, on the whole, I don't have an intro sort of like a title sequence. Sometimes it comes up Rog Vlog and I freeze the screen and I put a white line around my face and fade it to black and white. And for my Marketing Made Simple videos, I might do a collage of images of business people and just put Marketing Made Simple over it. So it's just basically a title card, I guess. I came across a few websites where you can actually create intros for your videos. And the one that caught my attention this week is called Intro Maker. Great name. It's from a company called Ivato, which also do stock footage and stock photographs and this, that, and the other. But this is similar in the way that it looks to Canva, I guess, but it's specially designed for video intros. And you can choose the length, you can choose templates, you can drop in your own video clips, you can drop in your own photographs, and it just sorts out the graphics for you. And some of the intros, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, that sort of thing. So if you want to do something to make your video have a title sequence that grabs people's attention, but you don't want to manipulate all the images yourself and find graphics, Intro Maker is well worth looking because it's got lots of free templates. Again, there are ones you can pay for, but even the free ones look pretty good. And it's just something to play with, and you never know, you might find something which, unlike TubeBuddy and its keywords, might just grab somebody's attention and make them subscribe to your video.
Super. I love the way you've chosen success on YouTube as a theme. Can't wait to see and hear what you're going to come up with, for the next few episodes. But I think you're right. This idea of it not just making obviously life a little easier for yourself, but being relevant and showing that you put the work in. The more I think about this, the more I conclude that first impressions are still vastly, vastly important. Are you giving the impression, rightly so, that you have indeed put the effort and energy behind it, or are you just doing content marketing as a task? You can't wait to be rid of it.
Yeah.
So it's almost with that in mind that I've gone for the theme of being in a position to provide and design better webinars, almost inspired by my content spotlight of a couple of weeks ago with our friend from On24 Webinerd, Mark Bornstein. And I'm even more convinced now than ever before, although it was always something that I knew, that the choice of photography, the way in which you choose to design your slides, is going to be important this year, because we are approaching this kind of incredible sad anniversary of a year in lockdown or some form of restrictions where, having to access information and the advice and wisdom of people via a Zoom call, Teams, or any form of webinar platform has been the norm. And I think it's really becoming quite important to design that experience. And back to our friend Mark Bornstein from On24, he made a comment a few weeks ago. He was saying, your role as the host or deliverer of the message is to transport your audience somewhere else for the duration of the webinar. And with that in mind, he was arguing that look at the photography, think of using video almost as transitions to the different subject you want to talk about. Watch out for the copy. I think, more and more now, people have gone back, I found, to writing a lot more words than they should and so on. And I think when it comes to photography, I wanted to recommend today 2 platforms that can help you find different style of photography. I know in the past, Roger, we mentioned Pexels and Pixabay and a few others like Unsplash and indeed Canva. But I think you need to be careful. If you use those platforms, can I please advise you to not use the first photos you find on page 1? Because as you can hear from Roger's laughter, they're now becoming quite popular on the internet, aren't they?
Absolutely, it just made me laugh because I use for music on my videos. I use Epidemic Sound. Again, we've shouted that out before, and I was watching one of my old videos from about 3 years ago, and I used a piece of music in that video. And quite recently, somebody has used that piece of music, quite obviously from Epidemic Sound, and they're obviously paying for it, but they've used it in an advert that comes up on YouTube pretty much every single time I click on a video these days. And I'm hearing the piece of music that I had in a video, and I thought, hold on a second, that's my piece. But of course, everybody can choose these pieces. So as you said, Pascal, dig deep, go into page 10,
yes,
or search a bit deeper into the subject and pick a photograph or a piece of music further down the list. That'll guarantee, or at least make sure, that less people are using it.
Absolutely. So the first one is a Creative Commons photo search engine. So Creative Commons is, I think, is reasonably well known. It's that almost universal way in which photos are marked, whereby they are available freely. And occasionally you may have to obviously give the photographer credit, but very often they're not. And the address, which you will see on the notes, is freephotos.cc, the CC being the Creative Commons. And again, as someone that searched photography extensively, I have found this photo search engine to provide very, very different results. There's some photos I've never seen before. Similarly, you mentioned Shopify in the news segment. Well, they have also launched their own free stock photo platform, essentially to support, obviously, those who use Shopify to sell products and services. But I will say, because of their background, I would imagine in one of the number one e-commerce platforms, the photography is really quite stunning. And again, very, very different. It can be specific of a product, but also it can just be used as a backdrop. So if you go on to burst.shopify.com, again, you're going to be accessing, I think, lesser known photography. so less likely to kind of be spotted saying, "Oh, I've seen this before." But also, you might be invited to be just a bit more daring about your backdrop or the background of the slides to once again, for a moment in time, transport your audience somewhere else.
These are great suggestions, Pascal. I'm gonna add them to my list because, as you would expect, my first port of call for photographs for my presentations is usually Pexels, Pixabay, or Unsplash, as you've already said. So yeah, let's go into something a little bit more obscure so that we can stand out a bit more.
And there's one of the advantage of being a follower of Two Geeks and Marketing podcasts. You'll be able to find and discover new things like this ahead of the competition and even your peers. Now, Monsieur Edwards, all this is possible thanks to inventors and pioneers from the recent past. Shall we move on to This Week in History?
Let's go. In 1878, the first telephone book is issued in New Haven, Connecticut by the New Haven Telephone Company. A copy was sold at auction in 2008 for over $170,000.
Well, in 1940, Gone with the Wind received 13 nominations and won 8 Oscars, including Best Direction and Best Editing at the Academy Award. It was also the first colour movie to win an award for Best Picture.
In 1953, Cambridge University scientists James D. Watson and Francis H.C. Crick announced that they have determined the double helix structure of DNA, the molecule containing human genes.
Well, a year later, in 1954, the first colour TV set using the NTSC standard are offered for sale to the general public. NTSC is a standard used in most of North and South America, Japan, and a few other places in the world.
In 1962, John Glenn becomes the first American to orbit the Earth aboard Friendship 7. Glenn orbited the Earth 3 times in 4 hours 55 minutes using an IBM 7030 Stretch supercomputer.
Well, in 1991, English computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee introduces World Wide Web, the first web browser and WYSIWYG HTML editor, to a research institution whilst employed at CERN near Geneva.
In the 1995, news platform and search engine Yahoo is incorporated. The company actually began a year earlier as Jerry and David's Guide to the World Wide Web.
Well, in 1997, Keith Campbell, Ian Walnut and colleagues at the Roslin Institute in Scotland, together with the biotech company PPL Therapeutics, announced they have successfully cloned an adult sheep they called Dolly.
Wow.
97.
Yes.
I remember the story vividly, but I'd just forgotten when it was.
Some of these news items really shock me as to how long ago they were. The one that stands out for me today is this whole idea of NTSC, the television standard in America, as opposed to the standard that we have in UK and Europe, which is PAL. Now, I'm pretty sure that it doesn't make as much difference these days because we're all using digital TVs, but it was something to do with the frequency of the transmission and also the number of lines that there were on the screen. But I can remember, and this can't be that long ago, but in the early days of the X-Files, I think it was the end of series 3 of the X-Files, it was a massive cliffhanger at the end of the series. And in America, they got to see the next episode months in advance of the UK. And my sister, who lives in America, in Los Angeles, videotaped the episode in America onto a VHS tape and sent me the tape. But of course, I pushed the tape into my machine in the UK, which is a PAL machine, and because the video was recorded on an NTSC transmission, it wouldn't play. So I had to take it to a specialist video shop who charged me about 30 quid to convert this VHS NTSC video into a VHS PAL video, just so I could watch this episode. So that's what sprung to mind there, was it was bloody inconvenient.
And I had a similar memory because in France we had yet a different system to
Right.
PAL or NTSC. It was SECAM,
Uh-huh.
SECAM. So if, for example, as I still am, I was used to be a major Prince fan in my teenage years. If we ordered a video cassette of a concert, Prince concert from the US, it would take forever to arrive anyway. But then we had to find someone who had a compatible player. VHS, cassette player, or like you spend money to get it converted into a CCAM. So of course, then I moved to the UK in '91. Take with me my collection of print VHS cassette, and then if I was to play any VHS cassette from France, all I would get was black and white. It wouldn't play in color in the UK.
I never even knew that there was a third standard of TV. Crikey. Yet again, Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast.
Pascal.
You learn something. I was going to say Two Geeks and a Marketing Pascal then. You learn something new every day.
Now, would you have gone orbited around the Earth with the IBM 7030 stretch supercomputer, or would you have waited a few more years for the technology to improve?
Do you know what? The IBM 7030 stretch supercomputer sounds like something that Douglas Adams would have come up with, doesn't it? It reminds me of the Bamble Weenie 57 Submeson brain. The short answer is probably not. But the other thing that, again, my mind's making weird connections today, John Glenn. When people say the word John Glenn, I don't think of the astronaut. I think of a director who directed probably about 5 of the James Bond films.
Of course.
I can't remember which one. I think it was For Your Eyes Only Until the 2, and I think he did the 2 Timothy Dalton ones. But yeah, John. I think it was John Glenn with 1 N instead of 2 N's. But yeah, John Glenn to me is a James Bond film director, not an astronaut. Sorry, John Glenn.
That's quite all right. Yahoo. I will confess, Roger, being a big fan of Yahoo, I used to be a big user on a regular basis until they started to lose their way a bit, because they did have a great service. They had email. They even had the early version of a social network called Yahoo 360, where you could invite, obviously, friends and family to connect on a blog. Also, they had all sort of things. But what is it, do you think, that they got wrong? Because they really lost market share quite rapidly.
Do you know, it is, because I can remember my very first email with BT was, I think, called BT Yahoo at the time. And yeah, Yahoo with the exclamation mark was, I used to use that before Google took over. I just don't know when whatever it was that went wrong started to go wrong. But whatever happened, they did seem to fall out of the... they just seemed to fall off the face of the earth quite quickly whenever what it was happened.
I wonder, I mean, I know that Google smartly invested a lot in business products, which I think, has played a big part in their success. But I wonder whether Yahoo tried too hard to be that kind of news and entertainment portal. And had they spent more money on, being a search engine with good products, they may have worked better. I will say, I wasn't aware that it started life as Jerry and David's Guide to the World Wide Web. I almost prefer that name to Yahoo.
Jerry and David sound like film stars as well, don't they? It sounds like there should have been a film about Jerry and David's Guide to the World Wide Web.
Oh, excellent. Well, to obviously listeners, let us know, what was your very first search engine? And indeed, what did you do when you were able to go on the internet thanks to the invention by Sir Tim Berners-Lee now, because of course he's become Sir since 1991. I'm not going to ask you about Gone with the Wind, because I know we've got a big chunky part in film marketing. But I will, express my surprise. I had no idea that the double helix structure of DNA was discovered in 1953. That feels such a long time ago somehow.
It does. I mean, again, a lot of these moments in history, it shocks me how long ago it was. I mean, Gone with the Wind, which frankly I don't give a damn about, to be honest, not one of my favourite films. But even that, my goodness, 80 years ago. I just don't know where the time goes.
Excellent. So thanks again for allowing us to reminisce and share childhood stories, but time to give others a bit of a shout out. Let's move on to the creator shout outs. So in this segment, Roger and I gave a content creator bringing so much value to their community a bit of a shout out. So Roger, who is on the spotlight today?
My shout out this week is for a journalist and broadcaster and author and podcaster by the name of Iona Bain. Now, Iona works predominantly on financial issues, but she's built up a big following in the UK over the last 4 or 5 years by starting a blog with a great title. It's called the Young Money Blog. So she's really blogging about finances and blogging about money, but focusing on millennials and Generation Z and that sort of thing. And why I like what Iona does is, as you know, I'm a massive fan of keeping things simple, and financial services can be really complicated, and Iona's got a great way of putting it into language that people can understand. Now, she's already also written a book, and I think she's got another book coming out, but the reason for the shout out today is that, and this is a shout out for a piece of content that is yet to be launched, so that might be a first for the show, but I got really excited when I saw this today. Now, Iona's father is also a very well-known financial journalist. He's called Simon Bain, and he's been writing in publications for well over 30 years. And what they announced today is that they are launching a joint father and daughter podcast, and it's going to be called the Own It podcast. And I've followed Simon's work over the years, and I've followed the rise of Iona over the last few years. And indeed, I've worked with Iona at various conferences, and she's been on my own podcast as well, Marketing and Finance podcast. So I was really quite excited to see what they're going to come up with as father and daughter, and they're just going to riff on money topics, but I can just imagine that the generational differences, that Iona focuses on younger people and Simon has got the worldwide experience and the wisdom. I think it's going to be a really interesting dynamic. So it's a shout out for a program that has yet to be launched, but I think it's definitely worth having a look, because these are two very experienced and very exciting broadcasters. So the Own It podcast with Iona and Simon Bain coming soon.
Superb selection. Thank you so much, Roger. So today, I would like to actually perhaps give somebody a second shout out, a lady called Nicole Osborne. She was featured as part of a duet where she worked with Tiana Wilson on trying out some live sessions on Instagram. But the reason I wanted to give Nicole perhaps a second shout out is because not only is she creating amazing content, as I mentioned a moment ago, but she's recently rebranded and recently refined her offering, I suppose as a result of using last year as moments to reflect and just reconnect with what she wants to do and what a positive impact she wants to make and to which audience. So she's now recently become the founder of Wunderstars. Now, some of you will know that Nicole is a German national, and she brings a lot of that culture into her delivery, and she's now officially the marketing coach for digital agencies, and she has launched, as a result, a new video series. You're going to find the link on the show notes. And for me, Roger, the reason I wanted to kind of give Nicole the shout out is both in terms of wishing her the very best of luck, and I don't think she needs much luck, she's so talented with regard to Wunderstars and all the different products that comes of that, but also to let others know that if you want inspiration around rethinking, recentering, refocusing your efforts into a more precise audience, then this could be the case studies you've been waiting for. So in terms of the video that she's been launching, she's now very, very busy giving lots of value. So these are very detailed videos. You have things like the best ways to build your network on LinkedIn, but addressing the needs of web designers and other digital companies, how to find web design leads on social, personal branding for agency founders, and so on and so forth. So I just love the clarity of thinking. I just love the clarity of the audience. And within that, I can only imagine that her content and her business will go from strength to strength. So here you are. Nicole Osborne is the second content creator to get a shout out today.
Oh, this is fantastic. And yeah, Nicole is awesome. She's one of my favourite content creators. Notable that last year, because of lockdown, there were several conferences that we were probably both going to, Pascal, which we knew that Nicole would have been at. And one of the highlights of going to conferences was always being able to catch up with Nicole in person. And it's been a shame that we've not been able to do that. I was slightly sad when she said goodbye to her Lollipop Social, which was the brand she had before Wonder Stars. But things move on, and Wonder Stars sounds just as exciting as Lollipop Social did. So I will add my good wishes to the success of Wonder Stars and Nicole Osborne. Well done.
Yeah, absolutely. Super. Now, Roger, I would like you and our audience to get comfortable. Just get into that comfy seat, grab a cup of coffee. If you have them, grab your popcorns. It's time for film marketing.
Yes.
Right, Roger. In 2018, there is a movie that probably had one of the simplest and one of the most straightforward marketing campaign, and yet became one of the most successful movies of that year. And I'm talking about Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri.
Now, that is not the sort of name of a film that gets you sitting up, bolt upright, thinking, wow, I'm going to have to get out and buy a ticket for that. I mean, Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Wow. I mean, it's not Star Wars or Terminator or Die Hard, is it? It just doesn't sound that exciting. And I seem to remember thinking exactly that when I first saw the adverts for it. But, as you say, one of the most successful films of that year, and an absolutely engrossing movie. It sucks you in. The characterization, it's emotional, it's exciting, it's sad, it's uplifting. It has all sorts of raw emotions in there. And I guess that this is film marketing after all. We talk about usually about how a film was marketed. We also have a bit of a rant about the film itself, but the actual concept, once you get beyond the slightly boring heading, Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, the whole idea of the film is about drawing attention to a specific thing, namely that Mildred, who's the main character in the film, unfortunately her daughter had been raped and killed a year earlier. She hires three billboards outside of the town she lives in to effectively give the police a kick up the backside to get on and solve this crime. So the film is about marketing. It's about how to draw attention to something and get people to take action. And that's fantastic, because that's, not only can we talk about film marketing of the film, the fact is the film has a basic thread that it's about drawing people's attention and getting them to take action.
You are so right. And I never really thought of it in that way. So thank you very much for bringing this, because for me, this title feels like a news headline.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So you've got all these layers, stories within stories. I mean, you could argue you've got three billboards almost, representing the three acts of a typical story: the setup, the conflict, the resolution. But also, if you think about this, so you've got the title of a movie, as you say, which is almost like more a working title. And then we'll come up with something really exciting down the line. But in fact, it's almost like a statement. It's a news headline from a newspaper. And then you've got the way in which, obviously, some of the byline, have summarized the film. It's also really quite intriguing, because it simply says, a woman rents three billboards to call attention to her daughter's unsolved rape and murder. Full stop. That's it.
Yeah.
And you keep kind of just adding elements of news headlines and story, and what you want for the audience to go, I want to know how this what conclusion this is going to reach. How will she, or will she indeed, get resolution by using this method. And once you get sight and get to watch the trailers, I was completely sold. I really wanted to see this story because I was just curious about the characters and how are they going to react and deal with essentially the three billboards creating complete havoc in the small town of Ebbing.
Yeah, and the marketing of the film with the poster was absolute genius because it showed the back of the billboards, so you can't actually see what's on the billboards. And again, you just think, I want to know what's on those billboards. I want to be able to drive past them and turn round and come back and see what's on the other side of them. So, again, I keep coming back to it. I like simplicity, but that is just simplicity genius, isn't it? Absolute simplicity genius, creating anticipation and desire.
And what I like, obviously, it's the British filmmaker Martin McDonagh. I don't know if you've seen In Bruges and The Seven Psychopaths. So, I mean, I was already thinking, well, if it's as good as or better than what he's done so far, and I will confess, as soon as I heard that Frances McDormand and Woody Harrelson and a few others were in, I thought we're going to watch and witness a story unfolding, delivered by some incredible screen performers. I mean, Sam Rockwell, which I've not seen for a while since a few of the things I've seen him in. It was just, and each time, a new character was introduced in a story, you would just say, oh my God, him, her. And all those characters just kind of carry the story so well. It's a delight to watch. It's a delight also to observe the cinematography, but how they explore the sense of injustice, indifference sometimes, racism, sexism. There's all sort of, really kind of hard-hitting topics being covered, but using humor so well as well.
And it is dialogue heavy, but that's not a criticism. It's good dialogue. In a certain respect, it reminds me of Tarantino type dialogue. Some of the monologues that the characters go off on are actually quite long. I'm minded of the scene where Mildred effectively takes down the local priest, and she basically just dismantles his argument layer by layer by layer, and she's talking, and he's basically just stood there, and you can see he's just drained of all his humility as she just lays into him, and that's so well written. And again, Woody Harrelson, as you've said, probably not my favourite actor, I have to say, Pascal. There's quite a few roles that he's played where I've just thought, I just don't like that. But in this one, again, absolutely and utterly believable character, so believable. And the letter that he leaves behind for his wife is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, but so well written. You'll probably have tears, and the delivery is spectacular. But yeah, it's all about redemption and forgiveness, isn't it?
It is, and that's what I like about this movie. The characters are complex, they're multi-layered, which is, again, a credit to Martin McDonagh and as well as the cast, whereby, in the same film, you can have someone doing creating a scene which is deemed to be bad, or some of this character is evil, and then much later on there's an act of kindness, and you're completely being pulled in different kind of emotions, thinking, well, am I meant to dislike or like this character? I mean, even Mildred, as the woman who rightly so is seeking justice, is not always going about it in the right way, so you can find yourself to be critical of her actions.
Well, yeah, I mean, she puts the billboards up, and the billboards are basically saying to the police chief, Willoughby, who played by Woody Harrelson, get your act together, mate. So she's having a right go at him, and then later in the film, he pays for her to have her second month with the billboards up. She even sets fire to the police station, doesn't she? She chucks Molotov cocktails at the police station. So you could be forgiven for arguing that she's actually quite unhinged and actually quite violent. And has she gone too far, despite the horrible thing that happened to her daughter? Is torching a police station with Molotov cocktails really the sort of thing that a grieving parent does? But again, later, there is that moment of redemption. I think it's so well put together and multi-layered.
So it may well be that some of our users and listeners have not seen Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing. So we're not going to say much more than you must watch it. You're going to really enjoy it as a bit of storytelling, cinematography, but also this element of, as Roger brought to my attention, grabbing someone's attention and so on. But I just wanted to, without giving too much away, the ending is interesting. And my question to you, Roger, will they not?
Yes, it's one of those Hitchcockian endings, isn't it? It's the sort of ending where it could lead to a sequel, but I hope it doesn't, because I think a sequel would ruin it. But it does leave enough up in the air for you could sit down and have a debate about, as you say, and we don't want to give away the plot, but they leave town on a mission, a man and woman on a mission, not to demystify concept marketing, but to track down this potential killer. And what are they going to do if and when they find him? And, well, yeah, I mean, she's already torched a police station with Molotov cocktails. In one respect, you could think she's going to string the guy up and slice off his skin layer by layer. But then maybe, because the film's full of redemption, there may be a moment of forgiveness where she lets this person off if she ever finds him. So, I mean, I've never thought of it like that. Maybe that's what we're supposed to think. Is she going to exact revenge, or is there going to be a moment of forgiveness coming through? Wow.
I mean, for me, this film feels like a fable, because obviously Ebbing is a fictional town, and interestingly, people living there are all kind of quirky characters, and usually the outsiders who come in from outside of Ebbing always seem to be a bit perplexed by the behaviour of all, from the police to Mildred and a few others. But I think it's right. It's about drawing out morality. It's about drawing out lessons in life. It's about obviously inviting the film goers and people watching it together to discuss it after, which I think is always a mark of a great film, when you end up discussing it afterwards.
Yeah, and I've watched quite a few films recently, which I would probably describe as scary small American town type films, where the cops always seem to be bent, and there seems to be a lot of corruption and quite a lot of violence, especially within families. So this one sort of rises above that. It's not a cliche. It genuinely gets you thinking about, just something happens, and in this case, something as simple as putting up 3 posters has a knock-on effect which affects so many people within the town. It's a different film than we've, it's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, it's not action, shoot 'em up, that sort of thing. It's a more cerebral type film, this, Pascal. But
it is
definitely good.
And for me, what I like about it, it's almost, using a safe formula, which is something happens to a town, and we observe individuals reacting to that sudden change to their kind of quiet life or kind of linear life. But within that, whilst it is a safe formula, we have moments where you're shocked and surprised. But I go back to this idea of, it's just like a news item. 3 billboards outside of Ebbing. And then you suddenly observe, what's happening whilst that is the case. Shall we try and extract some marketing lessons for the purpose of this podcast, Roger?
Yeah, again, it just plays into that whole simplicity thing. The posters showing the backs of the billboards was at once intriguing, raised expectations, was phenomenally simple but phenomenally clever. And that they didn't do massive social media campaigns for these films and multiple different styles of trailers and sponsorships. It was pretty simple and based around those posters and a couple of trailers here and there, wasn't it?
And I think for me, the one element that they did very well, although they will say that the marketing execution was simple, you're right, there was one or two posters. There was definitely one, what they call red band trailer, where this is the uncut version. I will say, both in the trailer and the movies, I don't think I've ever heard so much profanity ever in any movies, apart from maybe Tarantino, as you mentioned. So that red band trailer was quite something. Then they did a different trailer, which is actually more around Mildred and how she's dealing with the sense of loss and so on. And then, the usual social media kind of activities. But one thing they did really well, more than maybe other movies you and I've reviewed, is the use of film festival over a long period of time.
Yeah, and again, sitting here, my own immediate reaction was, it's a dull title for a film. You would have thought, actually, they would have had to have pulled the stops out and blitzed it as much as they possibly could across multiple platforms to get people to be interested in something that actually sounds pretty dull. But they must have had a massive amount of confidence in the quality of the script and the acting and the cinematography and the direction. They knew it was going to be successful, and therefore they chose this less in-your-face approach. And again, maybe the word of mouth that came out of those film festivals was enough to make it go big.
Well, quite. I mean, let's not forget, the many awards that it won. I mean, I just did a quick look on my go-to website, like many others out there, IMDb, for in preparation with this podcast. 223 nominations across around the world, winning 132 awards, including 2 Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
This is not, a small win. And it's back to this idea of, trying to derive a lesson from this. Do we, all of us as content creators, do we do enough to really promote the content we produce, or are we too quick to move on to the next execution? So are we doing enough to make sure that video, that podcast, that article is featured on networks of sort, our version of film festival, or are we sometimes tempted to say, well, I've done a podcast, thank you very much, next one, as opposed to squeezing more value and more exposure from that one bit of content?
Oh, Pascal, I'm guilty of this every day. I post a new episode of a podcast. We post an episode of this podcast. I post a video. You post a video. We do a few tweets. We do a few emails, and we move on to the next one. Sometimes I think, no, maybe we should have a sustained, absolute blitz of promoting one piece of content, and just see how much more we can elevate it.
No, absolutely. Anything else that comes to mind, Roger, when it comes to potential marketing lessons?
Not really. I just love the simplicity of this. I think the film sells itself. The intrigue gets you into the film, and once you've watched the first 10 minutes, you can't avoid watching the rest of it. I actually did watch it again last weekend after we decided we were going to do this film today, and I remember enjoying it the first time. I think the second time I immersed myself even more in the dialogue, and I think that this is a dialogue-rich film, and it is just so good. Every line is quotable, and every line can stir up the emotion and stir up sadness, happiness, redemption, whatever it might be. It's a remarkably well-written film.
French, you mentioned, I'm just picking up what you said, the first 10 minutes and then you're in.
Yes.
Have you noticed that for a number of those movies on the official YouTube channel, you can now watch for free the first 10 minutes? Warner Brothers are doing it, obviously. I can't remember the distribution company for this one, but I just suddenly remembered that it's becoming now a more common marketing tactic to literally showcase the first 10 minutes of any films on YouTube with the calls to action to then rent, buy, or stream. So back to a lesson that we may have just improvised, you and I, just now. Should we find ways to, again, give people that first 10 minutes across, our network, and not necessarily just a full version? Just a thought.
Yeah, come on, United Artists. We want the first 10 minutes of No Time to Die, because we're fed up with waiting for the full 120 minutes of it.
Excellent. Well, Monsieur Roger Edwards, this was episode 29. It was a good one, as they say around here.
Good one. Very good one. 29 episodes, Pascal. Unbelievable. And it's still as exciting and enjoyable recording these sessions as it was when we did episode number 1.
Likewise, my dear friend. And to our viewers and listeners, thank you again for your support. Do drop your messages. They make a big, big difference at this moment in time. Until the next one, make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards. Bye for now.